So, the nervous system. One of my strengths is not physiology, just gonna let you know, okay? But as far as how this relates to yoga and why yoga can be so beneficial to the nervous system and how as teachers we can create a space for students to relax both on a physical level but also on a stress level, physiological level, is something that I feel really passionate about. So what you need to understand is that the nervous system is basically the network of highways inside your body. And it's a two-way highway. The brain is the equivalent of air traffic control at an airport. It's the one sending all of the signals, and it's the one to whom all of the signals, the response signals, are sent. So it's giving commands and receiving information, giving commands and receiving information. And the commands that it gives are often in response to the external environment. So you have your five senses, which are responsible for retrieving information in the outside world. You know, your sight, your smell, your touch, what you hear, what you sense, is all like little FBI agents out in the field collecting data. And then, sorry, I'm really into Homeland. And then that information that's gathered by the field agents is processed at headquarters, which is the brain. And the brain determines how to respond to the stimulus that it's retrieving, okay? So what kind of response is necessary? Do I need to alter something in my internal environment to survive what's happening outside? So once the brain determines how it's going to respond, it sends a message through the highway through the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And from the central nervous system, it's like little estuaries off of a major lake or river, I should say. There's estuaries, which is the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is all the roads and estuaries that are not your brain and spinal cord. So your brain and spinal cord is the central nervous system, and everything else is your peripheral nervous system. So the message is sent from the brain through the main channel, the CNS, and then through the PNS, to your muscles, to the nerve receptors in your muscles to respond, to the receptors in your organs to respond. So that's the one direction. The opposite direction is that your muscles, and the neurons in your organs are also retrieving data about the current state of what's happening inside and sending relay messages back to the brain to update the brain on the status of the situation. Because the brain has a lot to do, right? So it has all these project managers in each organ and each muscle to update the brain. How are we doing so far? Good, great. So there are two different kinds of reactions in the nervous system. Well, first you have let's look at the slide for a second, because I think there's a couple of important things here that we can read together. If you look on page 106 and 107, it basically summarizes what I just said, that the nervous system is an electrical system that senses and then reacts to the environment. You know, if this room gets too hot, we react by adjusting the thermostat. The brain is doing the same thing in your body. And then if you turn to page 107, it's just giving you some examples of some of the things that your nervous system regulates. I mean, really everything. Your mood, your sleep, your digestion, all of your major bodily functions are controlled by the nervous system. All right, so turning the page, you're going to see the two subdivisions I talked about, the CNS and the PNS. And if you travel a little bit further down, there's a repeat, by the way, on the pages, so you have to flip twice. I'm on page 112. Your peripheral nervous system is further subdivided into your voluntary and your involuntary nervous systems. I feel like this is one of the first things we learn in like second grade science class, you know? When you put your hand on a hot stove, like, it's an involuntary response versus a voluntary response where it will actively, willfully take action. Your involuntary nervous system is also called your autonomic nervous system, and it is further subdivided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is really sort of the meat and potatoes, or the tofu and the broccoli of our role as a yoga teacher. And that is that we're looking for ways to elicit a parasympathetic nervous system response. So parasympathetic nervous system response is the natural state in your body when you're at rest, when you're not under threat in any way. And this is when your digestion is working the most effectively and efficiently. This is when your brain is more interested in sort of like the housekeeping chores that are going on in your body. The blood is, saturated in your vital organs. The household is running smoothly, so to speak. But when you're under stress, or when you have to deal with a threat on your life, the nervous system will react automatically with what's called a fight or flight response. And that is the sympathetic nervous system. And what happens in this response is that the blood, which is usually like helping you digest your food and eliminate your digestion, is then basically shunted to your extremities. Your pupils dilate, you begin to sweat, your heart rate goes up, your oxygen consumption levels go up, basically preparing your body to either fight or flee the impending or perceived danger. And what's really interesting, I think maybe questionably, from our perspective, the most interesting word is perceived. Perceived danger. Because someone else's trash is another person's treasure, as you know. So back in the good old days, when we were living in caves and foraging for food, threats were very raw, very real, like a basic survival. And the fight or flight response was evolved in order to actually keep us alive, so that we could run away from the woolly mammoth and make sure that we could go home protected. In today's world, though, the fight or flight response is triggered to the extent that some people live in a perpetual state of fight or flight. That the perceived danger has transferred from the lion and the woolly mammoth, and the, am I going to eat tonight, to how am I going to deal with this email? How am I going to answer all these emails? How am I going to do this teacher training and keep up my full-time job while I raise my children, while I try to pay my rent, while I try not to get run over by a taxi cab, while I deal with the jackhammers on Broadway, And the level of stress in our culture has escalated to a point that evolutionarily speaking, our bodies are not designed to process. So we never get that moment to just go back to our natural state. And so what we're finding, and I don't have to tell you this, is that stress is now becoming one of the root causes of many of the chronic diseases that we are suffering from as a human race. Everything from insomnia to high blood pressure to, and there's a whole really great list, and we have to read the list because there's something really funny on it.